All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about why I'm using Prisma on my side projects. As you may know, I've been working on like a T3 stack application to build out this online classroom. And I chose to use Prisma not only because it's built in default with the T3 stack, but because Prisma has a lot of features that really help you hit the ground running. And one thing that I've always seen beginners struggle with is like, what database should you pick? And honestly, the question is it doesn't matter until you get to like enterprise or production ready applications with scale data. Like it doesn't really matter what database you pick. You can pick Mongo if you want to just learn how to write stuff to a database and read stuff from a database. You can pick SQL if you think that your data has a bunch of relationships and you want to get good at writing real SQL statements. At the end of the day, the thing that dictates the database that you use really boils down to what does your data look like? How large is your data? Is there a ton of relationships in your data? Is your data resemble more of a document? Is it more of like a key value lookup? Is it traditional SQL relationships? I probably just said that. As a beginner, like these are the things that you don't really understand. You don't need to understand. Your purpose as a junior or someone who's learning is how do I actually just store stuff into a database and how do I retrieve stuff from a database? So with that being said, like the reason I'm using Prisma is it abstracts away a lot of like the underlying boilerplate for just storing some data in SQL. I think that's one of the main barriers for people learning SQL, which is why Mongo became so popular for beginners in online tutorials, is because you don't have to worry about migration scripts, right? For some reason, learning SQL and learning migration scripts is something that looks really daunting. And I can understand that. Like you have to learn a whole nother syntax and language to be able to like deploy your database and understand like how to synchronize your migrations with your running database and stuff. And then you have to actually like have, Postgres set up locally to run it, which is why, again, I think a lot of tutorials shoot for the MERN stack because Mongo's pretty easy to just store stuff and retrieve stuff. But at the end of the day, MongoDB is a document store, right? If you go and look up like MongoDB from Wikipedia, it's a document store. So if you don't know what document store means, then it doesn't really matter like what database you pick because you're not even understanding the purpose of Mongo versus like SQL is a relational database. So if your data is very relational, meaning like a user has many blog posts and a blog post has many comments and a comment has many reviews, you get the picture, So you have to look at your data. And for most cases, I would say that most data is very, very relational. So that's kind of like why I'm using Prisma and why I suggest that you learn SQL when you're starting off. Like Mongo is great, but again, SQL is still a huge database that's very powerful. It's used by many, many companies and projects. So anyway, that was like an intro to like why I'm using SQL over Mongo. And, again, as a beginner, pick what you want. But let me just give you a quick walkthrough of Prisma in case you're completely new to this and you're not sure if you want to use it or not. Basically, Prisma works by defining your models in this schema, right? So for every type of data that you want to store, like in our case, we have users. Okay, find that. So I have a user model and that has like the name, the email, and that user has different things on it. It has classrooms, it has submissions, it has an account, it has sessions. And if you scroll down to a classroom, so like I have a classroom model here, which resembles like an actual online classroom. Okay. So there's a classroom here that has assignments and multiple students who are enrolled in the classroom. So that's defined with the classroom model. And you can see here in Prisma, you basically define a key, you define a type, and then if you have any type of relationships, you can put this at relation and you can kind of link things together. And I'll show you why this is important in a second. But basically, a classroom can have a teacher who owns the classroom. It can have multiple assignments. You go down to assignment. An assignment can have multiple attachments. So like, for example, if a teacher wants to upload a MD file or a text file that kind of give you some supporting material to do the assignment, you can do that. An assignment also belongs to a classroom. An assignment has multiple submissions. So every student can upload a submission to an assignment. And then we have a submissions down here, which basically a student has the ability to create a submission that links to a file. You basically define all your models, which end up mapping one-to-one with tables in a database. And the cool thing about Prisma is that you can use it with whatever database that you want. So you can use this with Mongo if you want. You can use this with Postgres. You can use this with MySQL. Now, there might be some additional work you have to do to be able to migrate from one database to the next, but you have all these different connections here. So it kind of abstracts away the underlying database from you, and it's not as important to like know what your database is. You just basically use Prisma to connect to it. Now I want to show you the benefit. So like, let's say down the road we decide that we want to be able to rate a classroom. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new model here in Prisma and say rating. And then we can just go ahead and give that like an ID. So I'll just go ahead and do this. And this could also belong to a user who gave the rating. So I could just have this rating kind of relate to a user. And then we also want to give it a classroom. So let's just go ahead and do something similar like this, where I will put classroom here. And then we also need to say student ID and then classroom ID. All right, so now we have like a rating. I could also say like an amount, which could be a number. I think it's called an int. So you can give it like a 0 through 100 or 0 through 5. It doesn't really matter. You can kind of add the validation for that in your backend. But once you've added a rating model, you can actually go to your classroom. Let's find the classroom model. And I want to attach some ratings to it. So you can say there's a ratings property on classroom. It's an array of ratings. And this is going to be a relationship of, let me get rid of that. Okay, so we'll do that for the classroom. And then we'll also go to the student. And the student also has ratings that they submitted. So once you've created your new model and you've linked it up to whatever things that it's related to, the great thing about Prisma, this is the selling point, is you can go here and I can just go ahead and run a migration script. So if you don't know what a migration script is, I will tell you in just a second, but I'm gonna say npx migrate or npx prisma migrate dev. And what Prisma does is it loops through and looks at your schema, and it tries to determine what you added or deleted or modified and compares it to what the database currently looks like, right? So in this case, it saw that I added a new model, so I could just go ahead and name it saying adding a rating model. And what this does is Prisma will do the diff and generate something called a migration script. So let's just go ahead and look at the migration script now. All right, so this was all automatically generated for us. In the old days, you'd have to write this by hand. So if you're using something like SQLize or some other ORM, they may not auto-generate this for you. You have to actually know how to write these create table statements, how to alter the table, how to set up foreign keys. It's a lot, especially for a beginner, it's a lot. And this is why I think a lot of people just chose to use Mongo, because you don't have to worry about this stuff. It's one less thing to learn, but there's a lot of power into having this. So Prisma generates this, and then it also applies it to your database, right? So the way Postgres and MySQL works and most SQL databases work is that you have these tables and they have a kind of a schema set up. And the only way to change and add additional properties or columns to the tables is by running migration scripts. So the cool thing about Prisma is you don't have to worry about writing these anymore. You can just set up your model. I could add a new property. Like if I were to go here and add another one here and rerun that Prisma migrate, it would generate another migration script, and that would have a single row that says like add column X to table B or something. And then I can also run this against my production database if I want. I can go to my .env file, I can change the URL to my database and just run it, and then now my production database has all of the different changes that it might need. Yeah, so that's like the main selling point. I don't know if you use Django at all, but Django has a really powerful auto generator like migration script stuff too as well, which is one reason why a lot of people use Django, because the ORM is really nice to use in my opinion. Django is like a Python full stack library if you haven't, or framework if you haven't, if you don't know what it is. But anyway, yeah, so now we have like this schema set up. We added a model, we created a migration script, and we ran that. But there's also some additional tools that are really useful with Prisma where you have a way to view your data. So now let me show you. If I go over here and run npx Prisma Studio, there is a tool you can use to basically dive into your database and look at stuff. So in our case, we just added one called rating, and I can dive into it. I can see all the data that was associated with ratings. Now, obviously I don't have any data here, but if I were to go to like assignment, I have an assignment here, and I can just go ahead and modify stuff as needed. So let me just show you what happens if I were to change this. Let's go ahead and view this assignment, and notice it says, hello, welcome to assignment 1. If I go into here and I change this and put some like exclamation marks at the start and just save this, notice that it now reformats this. I did break, this is using Markdown, so I probably added some bad Markdown. Let me not do that. I'll just say hello world, save that. And now I can actually see that it changed my my text and it looks a little bit better. Now, I don't know why the formatting is all messed up. I think it might have stripped my white spaces or something. But anyway, I mean, like, you get the point. I can go ahead and I can loop through my data. I can change stuff. I can also just delete this assignment straight up if I don't want it to, So I can just go here and I can delete this assignment. And that should cascade and delete everything that was associated with it. And now we have a page that has no assignments. I can go back and create one if I want to. So this little tool, really nice. I mean, you can use Postgres. You can use PG admin if you're using Postgres or whatever MySQL Workbench to connect to your database and also do these same things. But as a beginner, like, you have this tool out of the box, and it really helps you just hit the ground running with just looking at your data, adding entries, removing entries, stuff like that. Now, there are some downsides to Prisma. One of them is if you're using Prisma with Next, it uses Rust, and I don't think you can have these things running on the edge. So if you're trying to deploy a Next app and you want to use like middlewares, you can't do any type of database queries from your middlewares because this has a bunch of Rust bindings, and that's not going to run on edge. So keep that in mind. Some people say that Prisma can kind of slow down at some point. I haven't seen any slowdowns yet, but I'm sure there's an edge case there that I will run into. But yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of downsides to Prisma. I need to look into them. There's trade-offs for every tool that you use. Some tools will have benefits, some will have cons. No tool is perfect, but for the most part, like, I'm pretty happy with how Prisma works. One thing I forgot to mention is that there's also a way to create seed data. So if I go to my package JSON, inside your package JSON, you can create a Prisma property, and that can have a seed property that basically tells it how to initialize your database. So typically when you're working on a production app or like a local development app, you want to have a bunch of data that's already set up, ready to go. So you can actually like log in and play around with real stuff instead of having to go and create a new assignment and create a new classroom and create all this extra stuff. You can have all this set up as seed data. So that's what this c.ts script does. It basically inserts 2 blank users that have some hard-coded names and stuff, so that if a person were to download my project from the get-go, they can go and they can just switch the roles and start playing around with this application. Obviously, you could easily just write this seed script yourself. There's nothing too special about how the seed stuff is working, but they do kind of explain in the Prisma docs how you can do it. And whenever you create a new database and run your first migration, it will seed your data, I believe. So actually, I think I might run this every single time. I'm not too sure. I have to go back and read the docs. But there's a lot of benefits to Prisma, and I would choose it over Mongo just because I like relational database and I like SQL. I think it gives you a lot of power to query and inner join and left join, right join, and do all these other types of selections that really allow you to grab the things you need for your different use cases in your API. So, little overview. I know I didn't really dive too deep into Prisma, but really, I think that's basically it. You define models, you give properties and keys, you can set up relationships, you can run migrations, which will auto-generate. You'll apply those to your database, and then you also have the ability to look at your stuff using Prisma Studio. And then lastly, there's the ability to seed your database using a seed script. So super easy. I know it seems overwhelming at first if you were to go and read the Prisma docs, but really that's like all it is. And then if you wanted to connect to Prisma from your API, you literally just import, like, let's see if I can find it. I have a server DB client here. So this is basically all you need to connect to your database with Prisma. You just import your Prisma client and export it like so, and that'll basically give you a connection to your database. There's some stuff you have to set up in your .env file, which I'm not going to show in this video. But other than that, you just start importing this client wherever you need to write or read data from your database, and that's it. So if you enjoyed this little overview, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, bell icon, comment, etc. Also, feel free to join my Discord if you want to talk to me directly or just get help from other developers who are also trying to learn how to code along the way. Anyway, have a good day and happy coding.